Hello and welcome into the first edition of the Devil Source Postgame Show of 2023. I'm Sammy Miller alongside Chris Cartman, following ASU's 77-71 victory over Washington State, improving their overall record to 12-3 and their conference record to 3-1. Chris, ASU's offense in that first half was really good and I think really propelled them to win this game. What are your initial takeaways?
Yeah, got off to a better start than they have on that end of the floor. Important to beat the teams that you should beat, especially when you're in your own building, right? And ASU had an opportunity to get off to a good start this season in conference play. I think this is one of their few times that they've been 3-1 in Pac-12 going back over the last quarter century. And so offensive performances tonight were better than we've seen typically, especially Warren Washington's performance was excellent. They spread the ball around quite nicely, and they didn't rely on the three-point shot. All those things, I think, are ingredients to the recipe for success for ASU.
And Warren Washington, I can't say enough about the big man in the paint. He got it done not only in the first half, but the second half as well. So how do you think his presence in the paint has affected the Sun Devils so well?
Look, I've been saying on Twitter for 2 months now, when Warren Washington gets the ball, good things happen. Quite honestly, ASU hasn't done a good enough job at making sure that he's getting the types of paint touches and that he can really excel on, because he's not just a scorer with his back to the basket. He's a great passer. He showed that tonight. He had more assists than Frankie Collins or anybody else on the team on a night when he also was 9 of 10 from the floor, made his first 8 field goals. Half of them were layups or dunks or maybe even more. And I think that they were focused on trying to get the ball to him early in a way that they haven't been necessarily for large stretches of this season, and especially in first halves. ASU's not a very good three-point shooting team. They're outside the top 300 nationally in KenPom. And so that makes it even more incumbent upon them to try to make sure that they're feeding the ball and working from the inside out. And there was a segment where Washington State went to a zone. ASU had some bad possessions. They weren't getting the ball to the free throw line extended. Then finally they took a timeout. Hurley had a conversation with the team. They came back in. Des Cambridge got there and got a lob dunk to Warren Washington for one of his 8 first-half field goals. We asked him after the game, does he telling his teammates? Is he making a point to let them know when he should be getting the ball a little more often? This guard U, right? ASU's had a tendency to be very heavily reliant on the three-point shot, and that's not the best pathway to success for the Sun Devils this year, and I think we saw that tonight.
And ASU also showcased their depth tonight. 10 players had at least 1 field goal. So how do you think that depth helped them in this win against the Cougars?
Well, look, Luther Muhammad played a much bigger role last season for ASU, but the team wasn't quite as good. You get into where you have the ability to sub 5 in for 5 out, as Bobby Hurley did at one point tonight, and 10 guys scoring field goals in the game, and then they even have other guys on the bench who aren't playing who are reasonably talented, like Enoch Boache. I think what it tells you is that there's competition, and guys know that they have to perform. They have to practice successfully. They can't take days off. They can't slack on defense. Of course, this is a very good ASU defensive team, probably the best that I've seen in quite a long time. And all of those are the things that are enabling this team to have one of its best records in recent history. Luther Muhammad, I think, was a great emblem of that. He had 9 points off the bench. I don't even know if he had 9 minutes in the game. He had a nice rebound. He had a second chance basket. He's always kind of been a scrappier defensive player, but I just thought that he was somebody that represented what they were able to do tonight and throughout the season to this point with their bench.
And now, Chris, halfway through that second half, the Sun Devils were up by 12. A lot of people thought it could end up being a blowout, but the Cougars were able to come back and make it a very tight contest. So how do you think the Cougars fought back, and then how do you think the Sun Devils were able to close out the win?
Look, their record's not good, but Kyle Smith does a great job of coaching that team, and they always tend to kind of hang around. They had a big win over USC their last time out. That was their biggest win of the season to this point. They've played ASU tough with this same coaching staff previously. So not necessarily a surprise that they were able to claw their way back to make it a pretty close game there with just a couple minutes left. I feel like ASU's offense went away from the things that we talked about that were successful in the first half, getting the ball inside. They were settling for too many shots on the perimeter. Washington State's a good three-point shooting team. Bobby Hurley talked a lot about that going into this matchup. They went on a little hot streak there, but ASU was able to settle itself, kind of get back to doing some of the things that it needed to do. I do think ASU needs to be better at the free throw line. That's an issue. Frankie Collins missed the front end of a one-on-one. Your point guard has to be able to make some more of those shots. I think he's in the 60s from free throw percentage this season. So that's something that they're going to have to be able to do against better competition to salt out some of these games.
And these Sun Devils are no stranger to close games. Time and time again, it comes down to the wire. So why do you think they get into those situations, but why are they still able to close out?
Yeah, they've won the vast majority of them. 6-1 this season in 2 possession or fewer games. 30 wins over a 3.5-year period, which I think is the most in the country according to ASU Media Relations. That shows that Bobby Hurley does have the ability to do the things that are necessary in the final minutes to help his team get wins. People who have maybe questioned some of the coaching, especially in the last couple of years when they haven't really been successful, I think they need to look at what he's been able to do in some of these close games as something that sort of buoys his tenure at ASU, and they're going to need to win probably a continuing high percentage of those, because we know that they're not a great offensive team. They're going to have to be in a lot of these slugfests, probably lower scoring games in the 60s or 70s, and that's why, as I said, that they're going to need good free throw shooting down the stretch and to have good offensive possessions in the final minute or two in order to be able to continue in that vein.
And now ASU has the opportunity to get a win on Sunday against the Washington Huskies, and that would improve their record to 4-1. And they haven't had a record that's 4-1 for 15 years. So that's absolutely crazy if they were able to get that done and get that win, and also the sweep against the Washington Schools. So don't you worry, we will have you covered for that game and for the rest of the season on SunDevilSource.com.